Hello, welcome, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Good? My name is Juanpablo, Wright. I founded a consultancy here about 14 years ago, and it's really an experience-driven consultancy. And what we try to do is look at problems from a different perspective when it comes to design, when it comes to engagement, when it comes to the experiences that we're driving for. So let me ask you, who's familiar with these items here? Who has bought Girl Scout cookies this year? Okay. It is, to me, one of the most fascinating parts of the year, but it also represents a way of thinking that kind of just becomes counterintuitive, and we just all participate. So we want to use Thin Mints today to help kind of navigate the headspace, right, of our stakeholders. We look at everything in stakeholder perspective, and just to give you a definition, a stakeholder is anyone with skin in the game. So we try to find granular ways to connect to those individuals all along the spectrum. So as we start to think about this cognitive thinking, or cognitive dissonance, the idea of holding two ideas at once, two counter ideas at once, becomes a barrier. And any barrier forces a stop in people's thought process, in their thought process. So what we try to do is really navigate to the endpoint that's going to talk about the belief system behind it. So why are we behaving this way? And then what is the belief system that's driving that? What trumps what when it comes to cognitive dissonance? If I have two conflicting ideas in my mind, what's going to win out? So remarkably enough, the Thin Mint is a great example of this. So what we're going to do today is kind of just dive into the way that we think about getting in between the ears. A lot of people talk about all the things that go around getting in people's minds, but the reality of it is everything we're doing is try to get between the ears and think about what's happening when they're making decisions. What are the third rail issues that we have to consider when we're talking to people? So we look at the key components of identity. We look at the shortcuts that we use to snap everything together and throw it into place. And then really the underlying belief systems that are going to drive the decision making. All right, those are the three kind of key areas. Also, it's good to think about also the idea that how I got here. I am not a traditional UX information architecture kind of guy. I didn't get to this world. Unlike many of you guys, I'm sure you took a straight line to exactly where you are today. But I came to this world from a much different perspective. And I feel like I kind of entered this domain through the back alley entrance. All right, so when I got into this world, it was interesting to see all the different perspectives and all the different ways people were looking at problems. But for me, what I'm passionate about is building healthy, lasting relationship through experiences. And we look at everything in a very granular way. We drive down to every single stakeholder that we're going to have in consideration for an organization and any kind of products that we design to, anything. So a lot of people think outside. They think external when they think about stakeholders. They think about, well, what's the client going to, what's the customer going to do here? We think of it as an entire process all the way around. And we try to build granular relationships and granular experiences at the very most basic levels of how people think. Because really that's the connective tissue that holds us all together. The goals for today are pretty straightforward. We want to share with you how we serve our clients so you can better serve yours. So to really get a feel, we're going to outline the backbone of how we do our work with individual individual decision making. Give you guys a few ideas and takeaways for today that you can apply, and then hopefully just become a tiny little cog in how you affect and design the future. To do this, I'm just going to go give you an overview of who we work with so you can understand the perspective that I'm coming from. So this is just an overview and perspective of the community of clients. So I deal a lot with private equity firms, institutional investors, software designers, equipment manufacturers for medical devices. That's really the world that I live in. Service-based industries. The focus is pretty straightforward. FinTech, life science, healthcare. Those are the clients that I deal with. And ultimately, how do we win? What's our bread and butter? We help people really focus on developing new offerings, tweaking current ones, driving organizational design, and then just being kind of a troubleshooter or bouncing ideas, a sounding board for them. So it can be on any level that they want to engage with. So the way we work is pretty, I wouldn't say it's different, it's just we use different definitions for things. And we use a few things that I think it's just, if we use some common sense language, it makes life a lot easier to understand the perspective we're coming from. For a stakeholder, this is a simple definition, anyone with skin in the game. Doesn't matter, internal, external, period. It can be from a trustee to board of directors to employees, that's internal, all the way to what's my customer base look like, who are the vendors I'm working with, everything. We take that all into consideration. We define a market as a place for people to go to have a conversation. With that conversation, what they're looking for is a relationship. And that relationship is going to solve their problem. It's that simple. It doesn't matter, the marketplace itself can be digital, it can be physical, doesn't matter. They're going to have a conversation sometimes, depending on where you are. It might be a little bit less of a conversation, more like a monologue, but the conversation they're having is to find a relationship, and that relationship can be with anything. So don't think of just people, think about places, spaces, anything they're going to engage with. I mean, think about how many times you've said, I love to write with this pen. You kind of have a relationship with that pen at this point. So what is it doing for you, right? Domain, just again, a specific sphere or activity of knowledge, and are the key components of who we are. That's who we look at in our domain perspective. And mental models in this scenario is how we snap together the world in a really quick way and make a decision. So if you really think about it, when you're looking at a problem, if you're over the age of 25, your neural pathways, everything you've done is snapped into place, so you only have to see a smidgen of information to just all of a sudden focus on a point and make a decision. So at ages 5, 12, and 25, each of those phases in your life, your neural patterns are starting to sort of harden and set in a certain way. So it doesn't mean at age 25 you can't learn new things. It just depends on how you've taught yourself to learn all the way up to that point and how open you are to new ideas. So we often think about how are people snapping into their mental models. This one is by far the most difficult item to sort of tackle. Ground rules and mantras for approaching work, super simple again. And we talk about this all the time. Goals fall to the heights of their systems and structures. We get super granular and build out very elaborate systems because it's going to be complex on the back end, but simplified on the front end. All right? Every opportunity, we start every opportunity with a beginner's mindset. I don't know anything about this, period. I want to learn, I want to do my research, I want to analyze, and I want to validate. I try not to bring any, again, it's not completely impossible, but you try to eliminate your bias, or your, more than just your bias, your blind spots to coming to these approaches, all right? So doing the research is extraordinarily important. For me, I find research just to be a great way to find new ideas. So we're all players on another person's stage. This one is, again, take yourself out of the equation. It's not about you. How does this fit into someone else's world? How does it drop into their workflow? How is it going to change the way they're doing what they want to do and accomplish what they're trying to accomplish? Not the other way around. Often this is the one, too, that trips people up, because you end up following this kind of idea of a golden rule. You learned it your whole life. Do unto others what you do unto yourself, right? Kind of exists in every kind of religion or any kind of philosophy out there. Here we want to suspend that. It's not about you. It's about how does it affect these particular people and the audience and the stakeholder you're building. Because you're getting super granular at this point. Information has a flow and an energy to it. The idea is to get between people's ears. The information has to be accessible. It's got to be, if it has a positive flow, great. But energy that you're trying to add to it is important, and to think about it. You're building. So the experiences we're having are building on the front end, but you want them to continue to have a relationship. So think about you're building relationships through experiences, and then you're expanding on them also. We communicate through stories. So anytime we can, we're going to throw a story in. Stories snap people back to attention. It's a way to access their mental models faster. And then timing matters. Sometimes we can do everything that we're doing, but it was the wrong time to touch these people or to talk to individuals or to engage. Or timing matters on every display of design that we look at. So what we try to do is align the stars, basically. to an endpoint. So this, hands down, is the biggest pitfall for most people that I work with, most of my clients. It's not any fault of their own. They just look at their top goal. What's the desired outcome I've got? And if they get that, then they stop thinking for the most part. But what we want to do is say, no, what is the goal alignment for you as an organization and all of your stakeholders? What is the desired outcome for that stakeholder? Why are they participating in this? They're exchanging something, so what is it? Are you lined up on it? Are you lined up on how you want to do these things? How you want to engage? How you want to get to your desired endpoints? Because at that point, any actions you create there are going to be mutually beneficial and everybody wins. Every stakeholder wins in this scenario. But the problem is, a lot of folks stop at the first one. And they think, oh, well, we're going to be able to knock this out. It's not going to be a problem. We have these same goals. Do you? Because belief systems also drive into strategy. Belief systems are what's going to set the course for you throughout the day of how you make decisions. So really, it's more deep dive in how are you going to line up and make sure you do. So a lot of folks, I'll give you an example. I deal with private equity companies that they might have a portfolio company. And we go in and we start talking about, this is just a general overall example, about what kind of investors they're trying to set. Well, who wants to come to these companies? And inevitably people say, well, people want to invest X, $4 million, X. Then you start asking questions about, well, let's say you want to take a VC money. Well, what kind of philosophy do they have? What's their belief system in investment? I don't know. What do you mean? A lot of people follow a 2 for 20 model. Right? 2 for 20 model means an investor is going to put up 20 investments knowing 2 are going to make it. Okay, 2 are going to make up for the whole investment pile. So the simple question for folks is are you one of the 2 or are you one of the 18? Because if you didn't line up with the right kind of investor that just isn't going to give you money but give you resources, trying to attract and draw in the right people, you're going to die. It's a bloody trail of 18. And the odds are you're one of 18, not one of 2. So this goes into the idea of audience build for us. Again, audience build, this is what took me down the idea of belief systems and trying to understand deeper and deeper into who are we dealing with and what do they care about. So as we start to find the right experiences that engage, the right timing, the right people that we can talk with, you sort of look at old ways of building and old ways of thinking about stakeholders. A lot of people would drive into the demographic analysis, right? A lot of people would dive into the psychographic analysis. And they were fine. They would get you to a certain point. They'd get you in the neighborhood of where you're trying to be, right? But we wanted to go further. Okay, well, so when we're in this neighborhood of people, like, well, what about a particular street? And again, you get to a point where you can get the kind of engagement that you want, but if you really want to dive down deeper, we started asking ourselves, how do we get here? How do we get around the kitchen table in people's minds? The place where they're going to relax and show you what they're really thinking, what they're really hoping for, what they really want to engage with, what their real problems are, and how they solve it. Okay, because emotion is going to cause people to make a decision. I'm not saying it's the reason they choose something, but it's definitely, you don't really move off center if you don't have to. So what's going on here with people that moves them off center? And also, more importantly, how do they make their decisions? So now, this is where the plot thickens. One of my clients is a really brilliant artificial intelligence software designer. And they just kept going into the idea of ontology. And for me, my background, I came from both business world and from cultural anthropology. I love looking at patterns. I love looking at seeing how things fit together and how they can be applied elsewhere. And as he started talking about the idea of ontology, it became abundantly clear they're looking at it from very much the information science of the data set. How do we take this data set and basically understand and expand it to categorize everything so we can teach better ways of the machine to learn off of what we're doing, right? Well, for me, I'm more of the philosophical variety. What I'm looking to do is understand what's driving the actual person. What is the core competencies they have in various domains? Because that also is going to help us understand the whole world behind what they're doing. So really what we do is we took an ontological approach of just deep diving on domains. So this isn't an exhaustive list of domains, but it's a good idea of like general ideas, right? And again, this takes you to a certain point. But as you start to really start thinking about things and you deep dive, this is where you find the golden threads that tie everything together for people. It shows you the audiences that you're trying to build, the audiences that you're trying to pull back together. So let's just take 4 for an example. Body, you can dive into mental health, physical health. You can dive into diet, you can dive into condition, you can dive into appearance. Each of these subcategories is driving a decision point for people, right? When it comes to this being their number one concern, right? When you start looking at family, you're looking into marriage, you're looking into having kids, you're looking into raising kids, you're looking into caregiving for others. These are all points that are going to, create a way for you to think what's more important than what. Membership, being part of the community, driving, being part of a group, being part of something bigger than yourself. And then you also look at relationships. You can deep dive into individual colleagues, friends, family, establishing trust and how you do it. So back to Thin Mints. And this is one of the ideas is that when you look at a Thin Mint, you don't really think about it, right? You don't think about the Girl Scout cookies. You don't even think about how you did it. But there were quite a few people in here that bought Girl Scout cookies this year, right? The question is why? What made you do it? Because it's kind of amazing when you look at the facts. In 2019, they're going to sell $800 million worth of Girl Scout cookies in 6 weeks. So to put that in perspective, it's 1/5 of all packaged cookie goods in the United States will get sold in 6 weeks. And when you start asking people, why are you buying these? I mean, some people, it feels more like a compulsion, but it's not. It's something that there's triggering in their mind about what they want to engage with. How are they making this? I think about it. It's in January, it's the beginning of the year. There's people that are like, I want to get in better shape and get in better health. 2 weeks later, it's bam! You're buying 12 Girl Scout, 12 boxes of Thin Mints for a show that you're going to do, for a talk you're going to do like 2 months later. It's crazy. I mean, you're selling 1/5. I mean, if you just do the analysis, nobody is buying this much over the course of the year. But for some reason, right at the beginning of the year, you snap into this idea that, oh yeah, it's great. I mean, I remember these things are fantastic. A lot of people do it for membership. They want to do it because they were part of this community. They remember it as a kid. They want to support it. They also want to go back and be like, oh, this is what I'm doing. So forget the health. Maintain cookie health or buy 15 boxes of cookies. I mean, it's not an anomaly. There's people, I'll show up at home, my wife is a great example. I'm like, why do we have 8 boxes of Girl Scout cookies? We don't even buy cookies during the rest of the year. But we have 8 all of a sudden today. And as I started talking to people about this talk, you could just see it in their eyes. And they started lighting up and thinking about, well, what is it that's driving it? Is it, I'm putting body down on the side here for health, health reasons, and I'm just going to push that down. And I'm going to think about the relationships I'm building. I'm going to think about the membership of the community that I want. And that, immediately, when I see this Thin Mint box, that's what people start thinking about. Boom. They snap their mental model into place. And all of a sudden, they're like, I'll buy a box of cookies. And really, when you start thinking about Thin Mints as an example, you can start deep diving on a lot of different topics for a lot of different stakeholders. Politics is a big, third rail items are a big one, right? Experiences that when we were trying to build trust, we don't want to touch those third rail items first. We want to touch the other items that we can build trust around, have a conversation, build a relationship. Because the reality of it is, you start deep diving in third rail items such as women's health, abortion, any item where you have these two holding ideas. For some people in the United States, climate change, right? They have these one idea that's no matter what is going to win out. Well, what's trumping that for them? It starts with a domain, and then you deep dive into that domain, and you have to figure out and basically keep tailoring what you're trying to do to that world, all right? And that is really what we're up to at this point. So for us, as we're deep diving into this world, we keep bringing out new ideas and new ways of thinking and engaging with our stakeholders and driving down to these singular points. So we started to minimize the luck factor when we started looking and building audiences and engaging and figuring out, doing our research, what people wanted. Because a luck factor is like, yeah, the demographics, I got on that street, I got into that neighborhood, I got into that street, but how did I get in between their head? How did I get in their mind? How did it work? And as we started building towards belief systems and drilling down to the concepts and the sub-concepts within them and start talking to those points and drawing out, that's when we started to build a new framework to get more precision and get more understanding and build better relationships. Again, because the idea with user experience and anything that we're doing is the basic component is we're building an experience first. And then each of these things is the connective tissue to what we're going to do in the future with our relationship. And how are we going to grow the relationship? Demographics and psychographics take us to one point, but how do you grow it? And that's where you have to start to know people. And to know people is to understand their belief systems. So when you want to get between their ears and grow a relationship, you've got to be able to deep dive into that and start to bring that information into place. And that's when it goes back to my old client who was doing that in the ontological information sciences part. And that's kind of the place where we're going now is how do we find a better way to categorize these things and draw it out and understand in a much greater sense. So currently we're still building the structure, but at that point, this is where we are. And just as 4 simple key takeaways that we all work off of, again, is don't create your own headwinds. From the very beginning of any project that you're working on, if you don't understand how to align the details to an endpoint, meaning why does this, anyone inside this stakeholder domain, why are they a part of this? And if it becomes too complicated to break out as just stakeholders, kind of lump them into maybe a group for you if they're too big. But there's a lot of clients I have where they only have 6 clients in the whole world, period. They could only sell to 6 groups in the entire world. So for them, deep diving into this level was a lot easier, but more complex too because of how do we do it? And it was a global purchase. So suspend the golden rule. That's something we tell ourselves every single day. You got to remove your belief systems from the equation. Doesn't matter what you think. How are you trying to engage? What's our endpoint here? How are we mapping these together, right? Rest of the time, enjoy the golden rule. Definitely want to be treated like I treat other people. But for this particular part, suspend it and move away from it. Try to find those golden threads tying things together. Dig deeper. What is it about membership? What is it about a specific domain inside of this, touching people and making people move along this pattern, this continuum? And then always emotion moves the needle, but no matter what, your belief system sets the course. It's always the belief system that's going to trump. Even when you've got cognitive dissonance, you're holding these 2 conflicting ideas at once. No matter what, when people snap together the decision-making process, what's going to trump what and why? And understand it. And really, that's questions and answers if you guys have anything.
Can you give an example of within NDA, whatever, but like where stakeholders have like really strong systems, how you might be able to make it?
Sure. So I think a really great example is when you have a stakeholder, using that 2 for 20 model concept. So you've got people that have started a company and they're a startup and they've had some success at the beginning and they follow these patterns and these ideas and they're kind of flying blind, a lot of these folks, because they're the founders of the starters and they've never done it before, right? So their belief system is almost always about focusing on the product, right? You bring in other stakeholders like investors. They're like, okay, the product that's economically viable. We're more about the people. You show me what you're going to do here as a group of people. So their concern more is about how do we make this financial decision based on individuals involved here. You start bringing in other concepts of new investors outside, and you have to think, do they care at all? They're just viewing this as a gamble. So their belief system is more like, we're just going to spread it out as much as possible. I call it the glycemic index of capital, basically. Did I get $100 million worth of Coca-Cola, or did I get $100 million of raw materials I can do something with and leverage? Those philosophies and belief systems are very different. And by having people understand from the people taking the money, your founders and your current set of investors and your board members, about the viability of that money, that is a huge problem that we have to walk through. And then just drill down to, let's talk about these particular investors. Let's talk about the situation. Why are they bringing their money to this table, and what's it going to do? If it's not going to help you, you don't have to take it, don't take it. Those two thought processes, often, almost every startup I've ever worked with has to have that hashed out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
In the initial stages of any endeavor that you're involving yourself with, maybe it's not as general as this, but when you're setting out to understand the context the belief system lives in, or understand the context of the belief systems inhabited by specific stakeholder groups, how do you articulate or document what those are? Like in my mind, I relate that to design principles or pillars. But do you have like a method or an approach you fall back to when you're trying to scale on paper? Hey, this is the world that these people live in, or hey, these are the belief systems that we're going to have to work within.
So basically I use, it's not an exhaustive list, but I also have to limit it because you can't go, you can have an exhaustive list of these things, but I stick with about 14 to 15 total. And you can eliminate some because there's two concepts. One is the way I work with people. So I work with organizations that are people-focused. And when I say that they're people-focused, they view people as a profit center, okay? They don't view them as a cost center. Because if you have a philosophy as a business owner that you view individuals as a cost center, we're probably not going to work together very well. Because when they automate something inside of their world, or when they eliminate work in that automation sense, they fire people. And it's counterintuitive because all of a sudden it's like, when you explain to individuals, you're firing these people that have this massive knowledge about what you're doing. Why don't we look for them for new ideas? A business is basically composed of this. Business success is this. Idea plus people equals business success. People's a huge part of this. Do ideas like all of a sudden just pop up on their own? Absolutely not. They come from people. People are the focal point that make everything happen in this world today. And it still is. It feels like maybe it isn't because of all the news that we hear about and all the things that we work on and all the things we design to eliminate individuals in the equation. But the reality is, people are the crux of it. So partly is I work with people that think in that framework. And then for us, we build out an understanding of what level of consideration is happening inside this project. Is it a high consideration item, or is it a low consideration item? That also is going to guide us on how deep do we really want to go, because when people make decisions about low consideration items, hey, I'm going to buy a candy bar for $25 or for $1. That's not like something that's going to be really profound and deep thinking. So we can keep it more on the up level, right? But how about baby food? Baby food is a big one. It's a very low cost item. But in the first year of life, or first 6 months especially, people have a huge level of consideration for that item. And now we have to start thinking about, okay, why? What's going on? Boom, we start thinking about family, we start thinking about caregiving, and we start layering down from there what's going to trump what in this world, and get a good understanding of those particular items. So sometimes it's a combination of things too. It's also, what does a situation look like? So when you look at it from an ontological perspective, when someone's making a decision on something, either I've made an offer or I've made a request for them to move forward in our game, right? What is it, an offer or a request? And is it sequential? An entire offer or entire way of engagement could be sequential, meaning I might have an offer, a request, and it just breaks back and forth. And then it comes into who's making decisions based on what and why. And that's where you just use this hierarchy, and you build it up. It just depends on the number, on the data set size and the population size that you want to work with. Another way to think of it too is it's similar to how machine learning is working. And like you're looking inside of populations for very specific patterns versus laying down a general idea of, hey, if I just do this general concept, I'm going to get all these people, I probably should get this, make it work. This is more like, hey, let's look at the population, let's look at the stakeholder population, and say, we want these very specific people, let's find them and pull them in. So, make sense? Any other questions?
So how do you build trust? How do you get into people's minds?
So, first and foremost, it's about every experience that we try to build out, we look at it sequentially first, is how do we get into someone's head? So let's just take it out of this world and think about an author, right? So who's read an Ernest Hemingway novel or short story in here? Cormac McCarthy book, okay? Those books were written at the 4th grade level. That is a 4th grade reading level. Now, is it 4th grade reading level concepts? Absolutely not. But to get in their mind, they are really great examples of, they made the material and information have such ease to seep into your brain as you read along. It's about that idea. So regardless if they're visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, how do you get the energy, or the energy around that information to flow into someone's brain? And it's about making it as digestible as humanly possible. Because you also have to think about, when you look at stakeholders and their decision-making process and these things too, is also look at the capacity that they've got. So who here works 40 hours plus a week? Who here has children? Yeah. Think about the stresses that you've got. You don't really want to think about something new, but you want to make sure that when they do think about something new, because they have to make a decision. People they'll hold off on decision-making, or they'll hold off on doing something because they don't feel like they have to. But once the emotion starts to pull into it, and then that's moving the needle, they know there's a problem somewhere along the way. So how are we engaging with them to solve that problem? And then just get very specific and very, very granular. You want to think, and from us, we focus on, in the specific is the universal. Meaning, if you can create a very specific example or a very specific experience for somebody, it doesn't have to be big, but just very specific, they'll see it and make it more universal in their mind. But they got to get it into their mind first. So it's starting small, and then as you're building trust. So with, like, say for example, you've got a long string where you're going to have all these experiences that end up with a final product, right? Every connection is a moment of joy, but you have to have expectation setting. So when you set expectations for people, so again, to set expectations, I got to know what? I got to know their goals. I got to know the strategies that they're willing to accept, and I got to know what is a beneficially, what is a mutually beneficial action. To do that, I got to really just deep dive on those parts. And once you know those things, you can start to create these moments of joy by setting out expectations for them. Make sense? Any other questions? Thank you.